So 80% carnivorous when you look at all those species, and that tells you something.
Well, it tells you that's the more efficient way to do it. You know, you think about it, you and I are made up of animal cells, right? And what do those animal cells need for nutrition? Where would you find that? Well, you'd find it in other animal cells. I mean, it's very simplistic, but that's all it really needs to be. It's, you know, we require certain things that are in our body, and where we get them from very similar places. Now, you can use, you know, I use the analogy, if you're trying to build a brick house, you're going to pick up bricks, right? You're not going to start with pieces of 2x4, right? So there is, you know, the right tools for the job.
You mentioned ruminant animals. When I was researching this, I had to go look what that meant. What is a ruminant animal, and why is that kind of important, just for eating those types of animals?
Well, a ruminant animal, the most common one we're going to be familiar with is a cow. So it has a 4-chambered stomach. You know, one of them is a rumen. They've got other bosom and some of the other parts, and that's important in the way they have to break down food. So, for instance, a cow is eating, you know, 100 pounds of food a day. You know, probably more probably appropriate for what we're talking about. If we look at a gorilla, you know, a lot of people talk about gorillas and how big and strong they are. And a gorilla's about 300 pounds, right? I'm 250 pounds, so slightly bigger than me. I eat 4 pounds of food a day. A gorilla has to eat 50 to 60 pounds of food a day because they're that inefficient. Not only do they do that, they have to recycle their food. They eat their own feces to recycle B12. And so if we're going on, you know, saying eat like a gorilla, well, are you willing to eat 40 pounds of food and perhaps, you know, recycle your food? So that's, you know, that's a difference there.
Yeah, again, back to my trip in Africa, I got to ride these elephants around, and I did a safari, first in the Range Rovers and then on the elephant. First of all, elephant goes much slower, so you don't see as much stuff, but what you realize is an elephant eats all day. Mm-hmm. Like that's what it does, like right. 16 hours a day. And when it's not getting a little bit of a coaxing from the rider, it literally is just pulling up, and it's got to constantly do that just to maintain like the calories it needs. Yeah. And it's massively inefficient, and it's actually quite shocking. And you see a lot of these animals, they spend most of their waking hours eating.
Back to the point of a gorilla. A gorilla spends 80% of its waking hours chewing. 80% of your day is chewing.
Right. Yeah. And these ruminant animals have this fascinating system through all their chambers of stomachs that basically take these vegetable matter that we would never want to eat or could eat and process it into this tasty meat. It's like a meat manufacturing.
Well, they turn it into fat.
Right.
They turn it into short-chain fatty acids. So all the fiber they consume, that they ingest, they actually absorb fat out of that. So they're actually on a fat-based diet. And so at the end of the day, we need fat, whether we get it from converting fiber into fat. We have some capacity to do that in our own guts, about 200 calories a day worth. That's where we hear about the benefits of fiber, because we get these short-chain fatty acids that we absorb as fat. So you can just eat the fat and get the same benefits.
Okay. Do we need fiber in our diet? We've been told all of our lives we need fiber. We've been told so many nutritional anecdotes. Right. Maybe we'll get into them today. But fiber.
Yeah, so fiber, that's a great question. So I haven't had essentially no fiber in 6 years. I'm not dead, right? Clearly, so it's not essential. It's conditionally beneficial. Now again, when we're talking about, you know, eating a diet that is mostly acellular, like we look at the standard American diet, it's a bunch of processed food. So when you add fiber to that, you slow down some of that digestion, you give the microbiome a chance to, you know, to function like it's supposed to. You mitigate some of the glucose spikes with that. Fibers also produces satiety, right? So if you're eating these candy bars all day long, you're not going to get much satiety, but you put fiber in there, it slows things down, it has a volume effect. So there is clearly a benefit to fiber in the context of junk food diet, but when you put it in the context of an all-meat diet, it's completely unnecessary.
Right, it's just not needed because it's a completely different game that you're playing. But if you're adding a junk diet, it can actually make you feel full and slow down a little bit, right? Okay. My grandpa was a cattle rancher in Arizona, and I remember going to the feedlot as a kid, and I remember it smelled really bad because he had 20,000 head of cattle, and his job was to bring these cows for the last few months of their life, fatten them up, and send them for the kill. And we used to get a half a cow every year, and we drive it down to San Diego, and I grew up eating meat, and it was amazing. Then the whole cholesterol scare happened, I think in the 80s when I grew up, and my mom actually was feeding me non-fat milk, so I grew up on skim milk because fat was bad. And then there was eggs and cholesterol and this whole thing that was, 80s and 90s, and became this whole concept that now maybe we're starting to question. And I was just wondering, what do we know and not know about some of those factors?
Well, first of all, dietary cholesterol doesn't seem to have an impact on serum cholesterol. Saturated fat does in some people, not everybody. So there's a lot of people going on a meat-based diet, they see no change in their cholesterol. Some of them do see a pretty significant rise. And so when we're measuring cholesterol, the problem is things like LDL cholesterol, the so-called bad LDL, is not particularly accurate. That's been shown to be kind of a weak marker. Now there's something called ApoB, which is a little bit more accurate. These are the actual particles which cholesterol is contained within. And when those go up, your risk goes up. However, that's assuming all things are equal. So all things considered, if your ApoB level goes up, your risk for heart disease has gone up. Now what also happens is a lot of the risk factors come down. And so we know that things like diabetes, for instance, diabetes is probably the biggest driver of heart disease. And so if you get better glycemic control, and that's what happens on a meat-based diet, we have people coming off their diabetes meds, their blood glucose completely normalizes. That goes down. We see inflammation drop dramatically. We see things like our triglyceride levels go down, our HDL goes up. So many risk factors for heart disease go down significantly. One factor sometimes go up, called ApoB or LDL cholesterol. Do they cancel out? That's a question we don't know the answer. Now, we've got a lot of early information on people they've had vascular imaging after doing this diet for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. The vessels seem to be very clear. So, like for instance, mine, when I had my heart scan done, it was completely clear. My coronary artery calcium scan, complete zero after several years on the diet.
Because the theory is that when your cholesterol goes up, that starts clogging, your blood and will build up in your heart, and that leads to the heart disease. That was always the narrative. Right?
That's still in the mainstream cardiology will still make that argument. Now the question is, can it go up and your risk go down? And the answer is probably yes. Now, if everything stays the same and it goes up, then you've increased your risk. But we see a lot of mitigating factors that probably, don't know for sure. There's some studies in progress right now that'll help us answer that question.
Hey, it's Brian Rose, founder of the DeFi Academy. I've told you my 4-week crypto bootcamp is amazing, but don't take my word for it. This is what my students are saying.
The DeFi Academy was an amazing experience for me. It took me totally out of my comfort zone.
In this course, I was challenged, I was held accountable, and pushed to do things that honestly weren't always easy.
It's been phenomenal, and I can't believe we're already up on our 4 weeks. It has flown by.
Going through this DeFi accelerator by far was one of the best courses I've taken.
You do this course, you really get into the nitty-gritty of the activities that will make you comfortable with decentralized finance.
Thank you so much to Brian and everyone at London Real and the DeFi Academy for even putting together an amazing course like this.
Anybody else that wants to do it, please sign up. It is well worth the money.